And we are now on Facebook. We're going. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to History Matters. And so does coffee. Um, today, I don't even remember what I named the episode. The idea of it was enemies from within. Oh, whose enemy are you? That's what I named it, which you will see why in a moment, because declaring people enemies within the United States has a long history and an interesting one that I discovered things this morning I didn't even know, which is always the joy of waking up and researching for History Matters. I'm like, I wonder when the first time, wait a minute. So anyway, I'll come to that. But for now, I turn to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Annie Evans. I'm from New American History and delighted to be with you as every Friday. We will engage in the chat. Joanne will talk about today's topic. I'm sure you'll have questions. So here's how this works. We would love for you to put your questions about today's topic down in the Q&A. That way we don't have to go hunting for them in the chat. And we will be back in about 30 minutes and we'll start taking some of your questions.
Thank you very much. And I will also say that those of you who are here for the first time, please tell folks that you are here for the first time and you will get a robust welcome from the History Matters community. And I have already forgotten what episode it is. I was told that minutes ago. I'll
285, 285.
285, thank you, comes the voice from nowhere. This is the 285th episode of History Matters. Okay. And I will in advance apologize because somehow magically, as soon as I set this up for us to begin, there is drilling going on somewhere in the building and drilling going on outside. So whatever drilling is happening, I apologize. Okay. So whose enemy are you? I came up with this topic, not surprisingly, because of some of what was said a few days ago to the meeting of hundreds of generals and admirals at Quantico, in which President Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth spoke and said some very strong things. I'm just going to quote the phrases that I want that they said. I'm actually not commenting on President Trump. I'm going to quote the words that led me to this topic, and then I'm going to turn to history. But I do want to lay these out because they pretty clearly state the idea that I want to talk about for the rest of the episode. Okay. So President Trump said, we have many cities in great shape too, by the way. I want you to know that, but it seems that the ones that are run by the radical left Democrats, what they've done to San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, they're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war too. It's a war from within. And he said that he had told Pete Hegseth to, quote, use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military. That deployments in US cities, quote, are going to be a big thing for the people in this room because it's the enemy from within, and we have to handle it before it gets out of control. Okay, that's the language that inspired me to talk about what I'm going to talk about today. The reason why that language is important is obvious, but I'm going to come to the sort of inner emotional dynamics of that and what that kind of language does. But first, I want to look at a few moments in American history when people have used that kind of language and what has inspired them to use that kind of language. And I think that we're going to see maybe even three different ways it's been deployed. Um, the first one is the one that surprised me. So I did this morning, I thought enemies from within. We're going to come to Senator Joseph McCarthy momentarily because he's the one who famously used this phrase in 1950. So I will come back to that shortly. When I thought of this topic, the first person I thought of was Thomas Jefferson. He didn't use that precise phrase, but he used that idea. But before I turned to Jefferson, I went to Founders Online, and I know I've mentioned this before, but it's a database by the National Archives that has most of the major league founders, their papers. It's word searchable, and one of the handy things about that database is that if someone quotes a founder, you can go and look for it in that database, and if it's not there, odds are it's been made up. But regardless, I said, I wonder if any of the people in this database used enemy from within. And lo and behold, George Washington. George Washington used enemies from within. That surprised me. And particularly given that he used that phrase after turning the militia on American citizens. So let me explain that for a moment. I guess if I thought about it, no, if I thought about it, I wouldn't have used that language. At any rate, Washington, in the November of 1794, said to the Senate, okay, actually, before I read his words, let me set up the quote. So the Whiskey Rebellion, which took place at this time, Secretary of the Treasury Hamilton passed an excise tax on whiskey. People in Western Pennsylvania were upset by that. Whiskey was almost a kind of currency for them. So they protested, and then they came to be known as the Whiskey Rebels because they threatened to supposedly use force to fight off the people collecting the excise tax. Now, Hamilton, as Hamilton did, went a little berserk and said, as Hamilton would, this is a direct confrontation with the government. And if we allow people here in the first years of the government to simply decide they're not going to pay any attention to what the government does, and the government has no power because it's brand new, so we have to do something. And in the end, American militia were marched out to Western Pennsylvania, Washington and Hamilton with troops. I think Henry Knox, the Secretary of War, was out of town. So Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, was acting Secretary of War and marched out with the troops to crush the Whiskey Rebels. It ended up being not a lot to crush. Hamilton apparently was visibly frustrated that there was nothing to crush because this is Hamilton we're talking about. But at any rate, after that, Washington goes to the Senate. And this is what he said to justify what had just happened with the troops and the Whiskey Rebels. So Washington says to the Senate, um, with such demonstrations of affection for our Constitution, so he's talking about the people who were standing up to the Whiskey Rebels, with an adequate organization of the militia, with the establishment of necessary fortifications, with a continuance of those judicious and spirited exertions which have brought victory to our Western army, with a due attention to public credit, this is Hamilton, and an unsullied honor towards all nations, we may meet under every assurance of success our enemies from within and from without. So, enemies from within. He's referring to people who are protesting against the government. That surprised me. Not that I thought that that phrase had to originate with Joseph McCarthy, but I didn't expect to see George Washington uttering that to the Senate. And he's using it really to say enemies from within, meaning Americans are acting as enemies of a sort. He's declaring them enemies of a sort. He's saying this to the Senate. So he's not speaking in front of the public. And I believe at this point in the Senate, it's still not what's happening in there is still not open to the public. I can't remember actually what year the proceedings of the Senate opened to the public. But at any rate, his point isn't to speak to the public and sort of rouse them up, which is what I'm going to be talking about later when I get to McCarthy. But still, enemy from within, that's a fascinating language to come from the first president of the United States, George Washington, about the Whiskey Rebels. But again, he is actually, although he is talking about a small group, seemingly, but he's referring to future enemies from within. So he actually is suggesting there's a category that will need to be attended to. That, I will confess, surprised me. The quote that, or the instance of enemies from within that first popped into my head when I thought of this topic, and here is where, and I'm looking at you, Tim, I could not, so I even went searching in my handy volume of Jefferson's writings, because it's in here. I know it's in here. But this is my copy without all my pencil marks in it, so I could not find it. There is a point at which Thomas Jefferson, and I believe it's after he's become president, and he's writing to, someone on his side, and maybe it's James Monroe, or maybe I can't remember who it's to, but it's someone he knows reasonably well, and he says something like, um, it'll be useful to have a few of these Federalists, these, enemies, remain in New England, a little circle of them, because it will be useful to have them as enemies to attack. It'll be handy to have a group of enemies who can be there that we can push back against. So he's talking remarkably strategically. And in a sense, because he's talking strategically, that simple fact links this up with what later people will do, in which they're also referring to enemies from within for political strategic purposes. Jefferson isn't saying, let's go and get them, but he is saying, interestingly, right, might not be such a bad thing to have a group of obviously the enemy, and he believes that New Englanders were all basically on his side, but that they had drank deep of the well of delusion that made Federalists think what they think, but that most New Englanders were going to end up siding with him. Excuse me, but that keeping a few of them around would be very politically useful for strategic purposes. That's what came to mind. I'm right now, I don't have chat open, so I can't see if anyone found that quote. But again, I think it's like from 1801 or 2 or 3, maybe. At any rate, hopefully you'll find it. But he did say that. That was what popped into my head. I was very frustrated that I couldn't find it. At any rate, the most famous use of that idea of enemies from within comes from Senator Joseph McCarthy, who used those words in a 1950 speech that he made, I think, in Wheeling, West Virginia. I'm going to quote his words. He said, "When a great democracy is destroyed, it will not be from enemies from without, but rather because of enemies from within." He in that speech, and it's online, readily available if you want to read it yourself. In that speech, he says something like, one of our outstanding historical figures said, I don't know who that is. And in the time I had this morning to prepare, I could not do creative searching to figure that out. But he attributed that to someone else and then said, enemies from within, that will be what destroys great democracies like ours. And he used that idea, obviously, of the enemy from within to justify his policy of searching, Red Scare, searching out communists near and far, and in the process, trampling people's civil rights, pushing back against academic freedom, encouraging people to be blacklisted. He used that idea of these enemies from within must be destroyed. And he used it, and this is the sort of emotional logic that I want to talk about as we're talking about this today. He used it because of the impact, emotional and intellectual impact of that kind of reasoning. That, yeah, there are enemies from without, we all know that, but there are enemies from within. They're amongst us. We don't know who they are, but they're here and they're out to get us. Right, so first of all, there's a pretty important us versus them component to this, because if there are enemies from within, by definition, what you're saying is some people within, and in McCarthy's case, he's talking about Americans, and actually more specifically, when you read his speech, he's talking about prosperous Americans, right? Americans who've been given everything by their nation, and now look at them, these people in Hollywood and wherever else they are, they're turning against the nation that fed them and gave them prosperity. These enemies are around us. They're from within, and we must seek them out and expose them, which of course is McCarthyism. So enemies from within was a way of turning some Americans against other Americans. Very obviously, if you declare certain Americans enemies, you are justifying and encouraging people to turn on these people, to attack these people. You are making what you are doing, whatever you're thinking of doing that is repressive or suppressive or even violent, you're justifying what you yourself might want to do. Look at you. You're, in his case, a senator doing things to keep America safe and attack the enemies from within. There's a patriotic kind of component to it. There's that emotional, like it's them, they are amongst us. It's like every think about actually, and this might actually be part of what all of that stream of 1950s movies about aliens, Martians, people from outer space amongst us trying to turn us into something else. I have never looked this up. And this seems almost obvious, so it's hard for me to believe it's not true. But I would think in an era of the Red Scare and there are scary people amongst us trying to turn us in to communists and they're evil, that in Hollywood might very well have translated into, look, the aliens are amongst us. We must get them, find them, expose them, and destroy them, right? That's the kind of logic that this kind of language encourages. If you're venting it at, uh, aliens from outer space, I suppose you can pretend as though that language is not dangerous, but that language, that kind of language, asking people to see and expose and fight enemies from within, that's just dangerous language. There is no question about it. Creating deliberately an us versus them, suggesting that the them is dangerous and must be treated as an enemy, saying that from a position of power, like McCarthy, suggesting, he's an insider, he's in the government, and he knows such things. We need to do something to fight it. And then in McCarthy's case, posing as a wonderful leader of the country because he's fighting for America. All of these things are bound up in this idea of fighting an enemy from within. Now, think about the phrase enemies from within. It, on the one hand, is um, targeted and focused and scary and it gets you beaming in on enemies. On the other hand, it's the vaguest of vague statements, right? It's open-ended. It doesn't really say anything except there are enemies amongst us. That's dangerous too, right? That's because that in and of itself is suggesting, well, there's a them out there. We know that we're the we and they are the them, so we need to attack the them. In and of itself, that encourages a kind of open season on enemies. Again, a violent atmosphere, a violent climate. McCarthy wasn't loath to do that. That also the idea of enemies from within um, suggests that any problems that people are having right now, there are enemies from within that are causing them, right? You can blame unhappiness now on those enemies from within that are they are doing bad things. They are messing with a good thing. They can be blamed for things that are going wrong, right? And thus they must be punished. So it's a great blame game, right? It's a blame throwing exercise as well. Enemies from within can be blamed for everything. And if you're a leader, like a senator, and you're saying that there are enemies from within that must be attacked in one way or another. We must get them. We must declare war on them. That person, McCarthy himself, isn't going to go to war against them. He's encouraging other people to do that, right? And what you get in the era of McCarthyism is people turning in people, hey, there's a secret communist, and, Americans turning on Americans for the purpose of living up to, or more appropriately, living down to this idea that there are, enemies amongst us, traitors amongst us that must be exposed and rooted out and punished. For all of these reasons, that it's vague, that it can apply to anyone, that it gives people the idea that whatever problems they're having, they're coming from these dangerous, horrible aliens from outside, that it comes from someone with power and seems to encourage attacking and fighting and punishing, but the person uttering that statement is just saying something general, like enemies from within. For all of these reasons, that kind of language is blatantly dangerous and blatantly, I want to say un or anti-democratic because ultimately, um, and I said this in a different context for a different reason, it just popped back into my head. Ultimately, one of the things that is at the heart of democracy is dissent, is disagreement, is the fact that we don't all have to agree. It's the fact that there isn't only one way to see things, and that even if people have reprehensible, abhorrent beliefs, they can have reprehensible, abhorrent beliefs if they choose. I don't have to like them. I don't have to cooperate with them. I don't have to, deal with them in some way. And we have throughout American history Ku Klux Klan, people who have been allowed to have those kinds of beliefs because we as Americans are supposed to believe that people have a right to think and speak as they wish. So another component of enemies from within, and this is all over our current political moment, is to encourage people to sit down and shut up because you don't want to be branded one of these enemies from within. And I've talked about that a lot before too, that in the context even of my most recent book, that Southerners who were in Congress and wanted anti-slavery activists to sit down and shut up did that in part by being armed, by using threatening, like I'm going to challenge you to a duel language, by being physically threatening in Congress, by doing all kinds of things that were intended to just suppress, repress, silence, just to get their enemy to go to sort of, what do I want to call it? Give away their own power and surrender and sit down and try to avoid trouble. That's another component of what this does. It encourages people to want to be very clear that they're not the enemy from within. So that's another way of suppressing or discouraging protest, which is our right as Americans. So you can see how this idea of declaring certain Americans enemies from within, in the case of McCarthy and others who have used this phrase, making it clear that those enemies are your political opponents, but they are enemies from within. So it's not just that they disagree with you, it's not just that they oppose you, but it's that because they do those things, they are now being declared enemies. That is the most, well, not the most, can't say anything is the most blatantly undemocratic anything, but that is blatantly undemocratic to say because these people don't agree with what I think, they're enemies. It's not what that's not what democracy is. That's not how it works. Democracy is on a government level, debate and compromise. On a broader level, it's the fact, the idea that we have routine, free, and fair contests in which people come together and vote for their preferences, and someone wins and someone loses. And it's the will of the voters as to who wins and who loses. And the assumption is that the people in these elections do not agree with each other. They're running against each other. And also, sometimes their differences are enormous. Okay, have an election, and if a lot of Americans vote for one part of that, that whatever in whatever way it is, feels extreme or very good or very bad, that's the outcome of a free and fair election. Okay, so democracy is about fair contests in which Americans determine who their political leaders will be, and those decisions are grounded on what Americans think, and Americans are free to think ideas and have assumptions about their nation, about politics, about their leaders, about their government as they wish. They are free to think and speak as they wish, right? These are all sort of fundamental rights, the right to protest, the right of free speech, et cetera, et cetera. We are now talking about them all the time. But the fact of the matter is, when you are saying, let's watch for the enemy from within, you're kind of putting a damper on all of those fundamentals of what democracy is, right? You don't want to be the enemy from within. What does that mean? What do I need to do to avoid being the enemy from within? Well, maybe I'd better watch what I say. Maybe I'd better not associate with certain people who probably will be declared enemies from within. Maybe I need to watch out for people watching for enemies from within. It creates a climate, like a hunting climate, in which you feel as though if you don't agree with those in power, that in one way or another you may be hunted. For all of these reasons, it's abhorrent. It's encouraging violent. It's anti-democratic. It's what people do who want to claim power and own power with no responsibility as to how they get it. And in someone like McCarthy, the assumption that they will just hang on to it and that will be their power because they deserve that power and they have determined that they are good and the others are bad and America should fall in line. For all of these reasons, there's a visceral danger to the enemies from within language. Visceral because it, and I've talked about this before in different contexts. There are certain kinds of language, certain kinds of logic that bypass reason. So if you are suggesting that people need to be afraid of something or that they need to come together to hate something, if you're appealing to these sort of visceral instincts, you're bypassing like all of the thought and reason that helps us normally determine what truly is or isn't a threat. If you can appeal to people on this sort of I don't want to say base meaning bad, but sort of visceral, guttural level in which bad, right? It's bad. We have to rise up against the bad. That can be really powerful. That can bring people together. If they feel threatened, they're going to come together and they're going to come together through emotion and fear and hate and not necessarily through careful thought. It's another reason why this kind of language, the enemies from within, can be really powerful. So when people use that language, they're not talking ideology. They're not talking about things that need thought. They're talking about getting a visceral reaction out of people to point to people and say, you are the enemy. They are trying to turn Americans against each other. Enemy from within, which means Americans, people amongst us. They are the enemy and we need to watch out for them. That is just inherently dangerous, divisive, bad, irresponsible language. And the whole McCarthy era shows that up close and personal. And, famously, one of the things that ended that was one person standing up and saying, have you no decency? Or is what you're doing, have you no decency? Someone actually standing up and saying, look at what's happening, right? This guy, look at this guy who, by that point in the McCarthyism, had gone so far that one person in one situation managed to say in a particularly effective way, in essence, this is indecent what this person is doing. It's indecent. And others could see that. Others could recognize that. And it took, in a way, that was a way of combating this sort of visceral, guttural hatred with a different kind of visceral feeling, which is an understanding of what's moral and what isn't, right? If someone says, have you no decency? And that rings true for you, what that's saying to you is that something about that is indecent, is immoral. And if that feels true, it's immoral, it's indecent. That's a strong feeling that can move you away from these other repressive feelings. It can also move you, all of these feelings can be used for good and bad. But still, my larger point here is enemy from within it's a kind of weak ploy of using coded language. It's a pretty weak code because it's very clear what it's doing. But if a person with power stands up and says there are enemies from within, they are clearly saying, find those amongst us who disagree with us, and then find ways to out them and define out as you wish. It is not just creating an us versus them, but it is encouraging people to find and turn on the them, to see them as enemies. And when you are announcing that to a room full of hundreds of generals and admirals, you're having a military definition added to that on top of everything else. So I say this in part because it felt to me um, that kind of language is obviously threatening, right? It's obviously, and it has been pointed to a lot in the press because of the recent events in Quantico. But my larger point here is don't miss, generally speaking, the purpose in that language. As with everything, I say so often, when something is said and it upsets you or causes a strong emotional response or alerts you to something, nowadays, generally speaking, it's really good to pause and take a breath and think about what the words you're responding to are, what they are saying and who is saying them and what they would like to have you feel and believe. If you have a strong reaction, odds are there is someone with political power like Joseph McCarthy who wants you to feel a certain way, who wants to have a political impact and is uttering those words for that purpose. Don't miss the purpose in some of the language that's floating around us. And it's easy, I understand, given the fire hose of bad and given all of the extremes and all of the bad that we're living amidst, too many things to pay attention to in a single day. And I believe me, I understand that. But at least sometimes give yourself the room to pause and consider what is really being said or what is really being done, and to get beyond, I hate that it's bad, but to allow yourself to take one step further and think to yourself, okay, what is really happening here? Like, what does this person really want us to do or say or think? And how are they trying to do that? So to get beyond your visceral response, that's bad, and to think about what's the real dynamic here. And if someone is saying enemies from within, odds are they're asking Americans to turn on other Americans, that they are declaring opposition out of bounds, that they're doing all kinds of things that fundamentally violate what any form of democratic governance is grounded on. Give yourself the space to think about what's being said and think about what's being done, and to get beyond your instant response, bad, and to really think about the dynamics of what's happening. Because sometimes those dynamics, sometimes understanding the whys and hows and desired outcomes, that can be a way to be better informed and to understand better useful ways to respond. Ooh, I'm 5 minutes over. Yikes. Okay. I got carried away with myself. Okay. Mug, mug, mug. Yes. Okay. So for those of you who are new here, um, for all of the weeks, 284, I don't know, I'm so bad with numbers. Previous weeks, let me get my notes out of the way and make this bigger. There we go.
185.
285?
No, no, 185. Oh, 285. It's 285. You're right. I said 185.
You did. I was
Perfect
like, oh,
math.
come on, don't do that to me.
Nobody
Okay.
knows I
285.
cannot keep
So
numbers in my head.
for 284 previous episodes, you could do that so easily, Annie, and I would just follow.
285. I know. I'm the same way. It's
Uh,
terrible.
I've had a mug that in one way or another reflects the theme of the week, and sometimes that's a stretch, but you guys have come with me. Now, I don't think I've used this mug before. And someone gave it to me, and as ever, I'm horrible and I don't know who. So maybe let me open chat. Maybe one of you will know. But it kind of has to do with an us versus them mentality. Um,
Oh, I don't think I've seen that one.
I don't think I've used it.
All right, hang on. I'm gonna take a picture of that one.
Okay.
That's a keeper, as my grandma.
I don't know who gave it to me.
I don't either. Does
Um,
anybody remember?
it's a mug that is not in favor of democratic governance. Um, are tears of demagogues caffeinated? I think so.
No, no, but Tears of Demagogues is a good band
They're
name.
over caffeinated. Anyway, if anyone knows uh who, I know, is this a Carolee mug? Someone sent it to me, but I don't know if I ever knew
Like a
who
Carolee mug, but I could be wrong.
it could be. No, Carolee says not me.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Someone out there.
Somebody. It could have been the mug swap at the Utah conference.
This is more recent than the mug swap.
Okay. Hmm.
I think I got this recently enough that I remember unpacking it.
Hmm.
So oh, did you guys find the Jefferson quote? Oh, before we go into that, let us actually open things up to questions. But it as you can imagine, since I'm always here with the quotes, it infuriated the heck out of me that I'm like, somewhere in here is my desired quote. And I couldn't, I teach it and I couldn't find it. Oh, Linda, okay, nope. All it says on the bottom is made in China. So at any rate, okay, let's open things up for questions.
All right, we've got a bunch of them. Okay, our good buddy Dave says he's using one of your friend Heather's words, freaking. It says, what is the freaking use of having laws like the Hatch Act and I'm going to mess this up, I'm not a lawyer, Posse Comitatus Act?
Yeah, no, that's
Did I say it
Kumatada.
right? If they are ignored and or not enforced, what are the penalties for breaking these laws?
Right. Well, so the larger question here, and it's a really big question, is laws are one thing and enforcement is another. And we are at a point where we can all, point to the laws being violated. And if no one is standing up to not just point that out, but to have some Accountability, it's another word I use all the time, that we're in a crisis of accountability. What do the laws matter? Laws, are things that you do, you follow the law or you break the law and there's a punishment, right? There's like it's kind of basic how that works. And we are in a moment where the punishments for breaking laws are kind of free and easy. So, the short answer to that is that's a damn good question.
Dave
Um,
only sends in damn good questions.
Pardon?
I said Dave only sends in
He
damn
only
good
sends in damn good questions. I mean, this gets at a larger point, which I guess right now there's not space to go into, but the rule of law means something, right? The rule of law means there are laws, and the laws apply to everybody. And if you violate the law, then you have to be punished as the law dictates for having violated the law, right? The rule of law is a kind of society organizer that says there are certain things one can do and certain things one cannot do. And the things that one cannot do are laws that have been created by, most of the time, legislative bodies that are put there by us. So the rule of law is a way of ordering and governing society that involves all of us. It's a one of many kinds of pacts that exist among all of us, and they aren't always good pacts. There are many things we sometimes can disagree with. Not all laws are good laws, so I'm not saying always obey the law, but I am saying if you routinely violate the law and you assume it doesn't matter to you and the people who you like and who like you, that means that we do not live with the rule of law. And the lack of a willingness to enforce violations of the law, which is not brand new at this moment, but it's been for a little while. We've been watching that happen for a little while, years. That means something. And this is just one moment of many in which you can see the repercussions of that and how that can not only echo but spread. If people assume that there's no accountability for things that they are doing that are wrong, why are they not going to continue and even find new ways to do things that are wrong? Of course they will. This is, a lack of accountability is contagious. It is. I mean, anyone who has kids knows that, right? If you have a kid and they do something really wrong and you say nothing, you really think they're going to stop doing that thing? You really think that they're not going to like find another way to do like, like this would also be fun. You, it's contagious. Uh, the violating the rule of law and assuming that it only applies to some and not others. That is a dangerous contagion, not new to the current moment by any means, but there's a particular flavor of it that is being exercised right now.
Dave did have a PS, but I didn't want it to influence your answer. His PS was, I've given up on the Republicans in Congress and SCOTUS making up laws by overturning years and years of precedent. And a lot of people are expressing the same in the chat. They're very disappointed that the rule of law and all the legal precedents just seem to be out the window. So,
Yeah. Well, a moment of extreme contingency,
mhm.
right? When things that should and have been settled, uh, suddenly there's a decision and they're not settled anymore, and without an explanation, right? That's some of what the Supreme Court is doing these days, is making a decision and not offering an explanation for the decision, which in and of itself is suspicious, among many other things. Okay.
So people were earlier in the chat sharing that all of the government agencies were told they had to put on their websites before they left before the shutdown messages that say, because of the radical left, this website's not being updated. Somebody shared a couple of links for us to see in the chat. So Kathleen V asks, have we ever seen a presidency where nonpartisanship is so blatantly thrown overboard? Many examples, but the most recent being with these government website messages, the outgoing messages.
So I'll be a historian. A two-part answer. The first part of the answer is, has there ever been this blatantly partisan a president? I'm sure there has, in a sense, right? So I'm not going to say no president has been this blatantly partisan. What I will say is what we're seeing now to an extreme degree is not just a blatantly partisan president, but this act, right? That this idea that government institutions that are not partisan by definition are being made partisan in this moment by being forced to put that kind of a statement up. That's pretty extreme, right? And that's been from the beginning of Trump's presidencies, but particularly this presidency, um, declaring departments of government, declaring offices, declaring office holders who are routinely, they've been federal employees, they've been nonpartisan by definition, they represent, um, they've been there forever, so they are institutional memory, they are there for the good of the institution and not to promote one party or another, and that has been a targeted category of person in the recent past, right? That you're not supposed to be that person. I will say part two of the answer is if you see, like if you were to go to whatever department or whatever institution, if you go to the website and you see this message saying this is all because of the radical left, that qualifies as one of those moments that I just talked about. Because the first response is, what the what? And your second response should be, interesting. What does that tell me? What is the person who insisted that that being put there? What is that person saying? What is that person doing? What does that show about that person's desires, assumptions, strategy, way of doing things? How does that expose the person who's insisting on that in a cryingly blatant way, right? That's the most blatantly offensive, maybe not the most, I shouldn't use that language. I tell my students not to say unique most first, it's always wrong. That is blatantly offensive, irresponsible finger pointing that's so obvious and so extreme that it actually kind of can't be taken seriously, right? So there's a case in which pausing for a moment after you respond to seeing it there and then actually thinking about what it means and what it suggests about motives and implications, that's a good moment to do that, to really understand what that means, that that's there. Because not all of our government, not all federal employees are partisan. They're not. They're not, or in the past, have not all been loyal to the same person, have not all been loyal to one president, have been appointed by many presidents, have been in office over time, have a sense of mission and a sense of purpose for where they work and what they do. I mean, that's one of the admirable things about many federal employees, right? They're there, they're not getting paid necessarily the big bucks. They're there to make sure a certain thing runs in a responsible manner and to say, well, you can't do that unless you love me. That's a different way of thinking of federal employees. And that's the government does not belong to one person. It does not. We do not have a king. The government belongs to us. It's ours. We give people power. We have the right to take that power away. That's democracy. So anytime that you forget that things like the government, that putting people in office, the White House, any of these things, if you forget that they are yours, please don't. All of these things are ours, right? The government is ours. Democracy is us. And the things that we stand for, we need to protect them. We need to defend them. We need to speak up for them because they're ours. They don't belong to anybody. Presidents aren't kings. They're public servants. Gasp. What an idea. Please always remember that the things that are being, to use a sort of earlier phrase, bandied about as belonging to one person or other, they're ours. They are. They just are. Remember that. It's important.
Good question.
Excellent. Well, you guys always ask good questions.
They do. They do. And here's another one from another one of our longtime friends, Rich Houston. What happens when the enemies from within launch a decades-long, highly funded, anti-democratic campaign that takes over the government of the people, by the people, or for the people, by the people, for the people?
Repeat the question to me.
What happens when the enemies from within launch a decade-long, highly funded, anti-democratic campaign that takes over the government of the people, by the people, for the people?
Good question. Part of the answer to that has to do with what I just said, which is okay, organized people have a campaign that is deliberately aiming at overcoming of the people, by the people, for the people. But part of the answer to that question is what I just said. There may be a campaign, they may be trying to do that. That's not the way things work here. It may be the way people are trying to make things work here, but folks, it's not normal. It's not normal. It's people trying to grab and claim and own the government for themselves. And I'm not saying, and I never mean to say that we've been so perfect in the past and we've always been thinking of the general good, and suddenly now we're not, because as a historian, that would be a ridiculous thing to say. But if there are people who are basically saying, well, we want X, Y, and Z, and we like it, and we have power, so we're just going to do it, and to heck with what anybody else thinks, and then we can keep power and have power forever. That's not the way this nation is supposed to work. That's not the way this nation, that is, again, the most obvious thing in the world. It's not how democracy works. It's not what we as American citizens should expect. And again, there have been American citizens over the American history that have been denied all kinds of rights in all kinds of ways. One of the distinctive things about this moment is that we're all being denied rights that have been denied to others, particular groups over time. But now it's everybody. Right now, everyone is being contained within this sort of general plan about taking things over and making them a certain way. That's a plan, that's an idea that does not represent what's normal, that does not represent what the majority thinks, and that shouldn't be taken as a given. And I wish I had the answer and I could say, here's my three-part plan to respond to this moment. I don't. But if I were to come up with a plan, part of it would be to never forget what I've just said. Not normal. It's ours. We deserve our government serving us. That's what this nation is supposed to be about. And what I've also said before, and what I actually do believe, however Pollyanna-ish it may sound, moments like this that are terrifying because they are moments of someone would get bingo, extreme contingency, where anything, really anything can happen, and we're kind of all the wheels are gone. We're off the playing board. Who the heck knows where we're going? Those are moments when things can get really bad. They are also moments when things can be improved because we've stepped away from a lot of norms. And whenever I say that word, I think of Cheers, forgive me. But we've stepped away from a lot of norms. And what that means is we can innovate for good. We can repair some of what's been wrong in the past. We can try and make things better for the future in a moment where there is great contingency. There is possibility in contingency, I guess is part of what I'm saying. There is possibility in contingency, and we need to remember that and not feel hopeless, because hopeless is surrender. And we cannot surrender to this moment. We cannot surrender to what it feels like. We cannot surrender to the seeming people have power, are going to do whatever they want. We have no power. We always have power. We do. We have power if we come together. We have power if we speak up. We really have power if we do things together. We really do. We're not used to doing that in a sustained mass way, but just think about little things that have changed in recent years. I don't know, Jimmy Kimmel, any number of other things, right? Where if not enough people pipe up and begin canceling subscriptions or boycotting things in a mass way, guess what? Poof, people feel like, oh, well, maybe there's like actually repercussions, accountability. That's what that is, right? If Jimmy Kimmel is canceled and a lot of Americans say, oh, yeah, well, I'm canceling my subscription and I'm taking my money away from you. Guess what that is? That's accountability. That's Americans saying, okay, you do what you do. I'm holding you accountable for having done that by taking my money away from you. And if enough people do that, that becomes dangerous, that becomes bad, and things change. That's an example of what might seem like you in your living room, like bing, bing, bing. I no longer subscribe to X channel, and it might feel small, but again, oh, here I see 1.7 million people cancel their subscription, right?
Mhm.
That kind of thing can have an impact. And it wasn't as though there was some mass organized moment in which everyone was like getting in their mail, please remember to cancel this. People did that because they were angry, and enough people did it, and enough people were angry that it had an impact. That's part of what we also need to continue thinking about is the fact that it may feel that you're doing something alone. But if enough of us do a thing alone, it's big. It's big. So also, in these days when we sit in our homes and apartments, like I am right now, staring at a screen, and aren't necessarily in touch with others and what they're feeling and doing and sensing in this moment. It's very easy to be isolated in this moment and then to feel that the little thing you do by yourself, why would that really matter? And I get that all the time in response to things I say on social media. We have to stand up. And there are all these people who are like, so what? Like none of it matters. First of all, that's surrender. I wave my fist at surrender. But in addition, a lot of people taking action has a lot of power. It does. So we have to remember all of these things. And again, I know it sounds like rah, rah, us, but it's easy to forget all this stuff because this is a moment when those kinds of ideas are not floating around happily amongst us. We have to bring those ideas to light. We have to own those ideas. We have to spread those ideas. It is really easy in this moment. This is going to be the biggest understatement of the year to feel hopeless and to feel lost and to feel isolated and to feel like there's nothing that can be done. And that's just not true. It's not true. It's never true. And throughout all of American history, when people come together in groups, often bottom up, it has a big impact. It really does. So, okay, I'll stop. I'm like on my soapbox. Spreading it out. I want more questions. So I'll stop.
Okay. So our good friend James, who's been very prolific in the chat, which we always appreciate, he asks, he says, some politicians describe internal problems in much more helpful ways. Lincoln said internal rottenness, for example. Do you have a favorite quote or phrase for positively talking about internal issues?
Huh. A favorite phrase for talking about internal issues. Um, Internal rottenness. Did he really use the word rottenness?
Apparently, it's
I
also a good
I
band.
actually really like that, as a matter of fact. Right now, the phrase is not popping into my head um, a, along similar lines because I would say people who are talking about sort of internal ills generally are not using language that one wants to be happily chirping about. Um, I don't know if immediately I have an answer to that question.
He says the full quote is nations do not die from invasion, they die from internal rottenness. Abraham Lincoln.
Wow. I I I mean, I like that one. Oh, there it is. Internal rottenness. Um, I like that. Of course, depends on who's being called rotten, right? So we're like, oh, we like Lincoln. Lincoln's a good guy. So that must mean a good thing. But if you gave that fact to somebody else who you don't like, then that would feel like enemy from within language. So I actually, although I love the fact that Abraham Lincoln used the word rottenness, I love when historical characters, just people in history, use words or phrases that seem so modern. And you're like, like finding something written in this was 1801, and someone wrote to someone else. He wanted to give someone a quote, good swift kick in the ass. And I was like, oh, come on, 1801? And they said a good swift kick in the A, but still, you don't expect to see that in 1801. So I love that. But that language, depending on who's saying it about who, might not feel so good. So I take back what I said about it being wonderful and claiming it.
All right, do we have time to squeeze in one more?
Yeah, go for it.
Um, okay, our good friend Freda from Erie, Pennsylvania says Trump et al. Are trying to define anti-Semitism as criticism of Israel. What are some other examples of people trying to define something so irregularly? Like she's trying to be very diplomatic.
Yes. Well, okay. So, speaking as someone who's Jewish, um, anti-Semitism in
Well,
general.
Jewish members in the chat have been saying that they're being called anti-Semitic because they don't agree with what Israel's doing currently.
Yeah, well, that's always okay. So I won't go into great depth here, but I will say Israel's a country with a foreign policy. And Israel is a country that if you're Jewish, you can, go there, you have the right of citizenship there. It is bound up with Judaism. That doesn't mean that what it does as a country is always going to be approved by every Jew. It just doesn't. So if you were trying to find a way to be mad at Jews and you're saying, oh, you're Jewish, which must mean you like Israel, which must mean that I hate you, you're making a lot of connections there that aren't necessarily true. Um, right now, anti-Semitism, I spent my whole life dealing with anti-Semitism in all kinds of dramatic ways that I will not go into here, but it's been, blatantly obvious, including someone looking for my horns at one point. So I've had a lot of blatant anti-Semitism. I'm not going to deny that it's there. However, at this moment, it's being used as a mask or a tool or a shield that will allow people to make all kinds of grabs and holds and then claim, oh no, I'm fighting anti-Semitism. So what's happening now, again, is doing an injustice even to the idea of anti-Semitism by trying to spread it around in a useful kind of a way. And in that, by using anti-Semitism politically, that's anti-Semitic. It really is. It's like, oh, come on, just, at any rate. And whatever's going on in Israel, which I'm not going to go into in detail, Jews do not always agree with Israel. They just don't. It's a country with its own politics and its own government and its own foreign policy. And Jews may feel that Israel is important as a country, that it's important that it's there as a country. Doesn't mean we agree with what it's doing. Those two things are not the same, but that appears to be a really hard thing to get through to people, or it appears to be a really easy thing for people to claim and take a hold of, and it feels as though it's hard to challenge, but that's just not the case.
All right. Well, we've always got more questions, but it is
One last thing. So Frida says, but the US funnels billions into Israeli aggression. Yeah, those are government matters. Israel's being aggressive and spending American money on being aggressive. That's not about Jews. That's the Israeli government. I don't like what they're doing, and I'm Jewish, right? I mean, I understand why it's confusing. But what the US is giving to Israel and how Israel is responding, that's not about Judaism. It's about a country and their policy and what they're doing about it and whatever they're claiming as their justification. It's not inherently bound up with what it means to be Jewish. Okay. Um, I've been so ranting here that I have not been even seeing what's going on in chat. I apologize for not responding more, but I can see we're a little over time. Um, okay, so we are, as James says, we got a poof. So let me explain what's going to happen now to those of you who beamed in. So what's going to happen now is we're going to go to the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording. Whenever I say this, I think of the time in which I said that means that we will no longer be on camera. And then I'm like, what does that mean? We're gone. We will be on camera, but we will no longer be recording, which means we can be even freer and easier with whatever the heck it is we want to say or talk about. If you beamed in through NCHE, National Council for History Education, just stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are watching us from Facebook, you need to leave Facebook. Yeah, someone just said they miss Rosie. Rosie's like been very quiet. If you are on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. ncheteach.org/conversations. And then YouTube, poof, will be in the after party. We are at some future point soon going to be beaming in from my YouTube channel. We just haven't gotten there yet because of a variety of things behind the scenes that are complicated. So I will keep you alert as to that progress. But for right now, you need to be at ncheteach.org/conversations. Thank you for the National Council to the National Council for History Education. Thank you to Claire Zabo Avocado. Thank you to Annie. Thank you to Jessica and John. Thank you to all of you who come here week after week after week and take part in this conversation and ask such freaking good questions and really enable us to get down on the ground and wrestle with what's going on in a community-minded way. That's the most important thing we do is that we're here as a we. And it's so important because it's so easy to feel isolated right now, to be parts of we's wherever you can find them. And this is an important one. This is one that matters because of what we're doing and how easy it is to spread knowledge that you gain here to others or questions that you gain here to others. It matters. What we do matters. We are friends from within. Okay. I am going to, yes, I have friends now who just like make fun of me by saying we. It's like, I know I've been saying we at the top of my lungs for years at this point. Okay. So thanks to everyone. And I guess, oh, no, we don't have to save the liver, although we will eventually. But thanks to all who are here. And I feel like I've forgotten something. I don't know what it is. But you can tell me if I have, and if not, then we can go to the after party. Okay.